Okay. All right. So we've got about an hour and 15 minutes for our SharePoint Server 2013 certification exam prep. Um, Obviously, you're at the Microsoft Ignite conference. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Everyone's having a good time so far. And if you're not, I'd appreciate if you pretended like you are anyway. and tweet things like, "Gosh, that Matthew was like the best speaker I've ever seen ever." So, okay. Let's go into a little bit. Obviously, you're here today because you wanted to come see about the exam prep for the 70331 and the 70332 exams. These are for the MCSE SharePoint Server 2013. My name is Matthew J. Bailey. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer and a SharePoint MCSE. I was asked to only disclose that much about myself. If you'd like to learn more, I believe there's a lifetime mini-series coming out on me in the next month or two, so just feel free to check that out. Let's see here. On one other note, that's not me in the picture, although she's having a much better hair day than I am. Before we dig into the content, I wanted to quickly go over with you guys, because if you know anything about SharePoint, you know it's a pretty massive product, and if it's done nothing but continue to grow and grow and grow. Some feedback that I had been given from previous sessions that were presented at these conferences were that there was just way too much information that they were trying to jam into a small time period. So there's over 60 different objectives and over 10 functional groups that the exam covers. So what I've attempted to do was pull out from my own personal experiences what I thought were going to be the most helpful specific items to you. Part of those would be topics people have approached me in the past and said, wow, I really didn't think that anything like that was going to be on the exam at all. So I've tried to pull a couple of those things into here for you so that you be a little bit more prepared, or at least can leave the room knowing what you should spend some time studying. Before I get started here, let's quickly ask, as far as what people's intentions are for SharePoint, how many people have actually signed up or are planning to sign up to take their SharePoint certification here at the Ignite conference? Okay, that's good. That's about half. And then out of how many people here are planning on probably taking it down the road later when you get home? Okay, so a lot more. And that's nothing wrong with that, because believe me, this is I would highly suggest you invest a lot of time studying for this exam. I wouldn't just show up and be like, hey, let's guess A, B, or C and hope to pass. Just some honest advice to you. And then out of the people that are planning on taking it, how many people are planning just at this point planning on taking 70331, which is the first exam? Okay, and anybody taking 332 or planning on both of them? Oh, wow. Okay. I expected the reverse. In most cases, it's most people are starting out with a 331. One quick plug that I want to let you guys know that you should remember during the MS Ignite conference, all certification exams, and I believe there are still some openings, are 50% off. And then in addition to that, that includes the second shot. So not only is it half price, if for some reason you don't pass it, you get the code number so that when you go home later to wherever your country is, you can use that as your pass to take it again for free a second time. So that's something to consider. All right. Within our roadmap of SharePoint certification, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. It has changed in about the last year. So the SharePoint 2010 exams, you used to be a certified SharePoint professional just by taking 3 exams, 2 admin, 1 dev, 2 dev, 1 admin. Now you pretty much have to have an MCSA or some other type of prerequisite to become a SharePoint anything. You have 2 choices within that. So I've segmented this into 2 parts, what I call your part 1, your MCSA, and then part 2, your SharePoint MCSE. Your first part for the MCSA, as you can see, you've got 2 options. You can either do that in Windows Server 2012, which is currently 3 different exams. The Office 365, which is a set of 2 exams, is now the new recommended path. Doesn't mean you have to, but that's what Microsoft is recommending of the 2 for your MCSA to take. My personal experience was the MCSA Office 365 exams were noticeably more manageable to pass than the Windows Server 2012 ones were, but I think you should always look upon yourself to decide which ones are actually going to be more applicable to your job and your career and what you think is right for you. So after you've obtained those, or if you don't necessarily have to take those first, but just know that if you don't take them, your SharePoint certifications don't really have much value. But after you've obtained those or plan to take those, then we've pretty much just got left the 2 SharePoint exams, which are the 331 and the 332. That's what we're going to be going over here today. One last item I wanted to bring up to you, and they've got this URL also listed on the last slide. Microsoft does now have an interactive dynamics certification app. I think you need Windows 8.1 or higher, but it's instead of trying to, search and go from page to page and figure out, I need this one or not that one, or this will make me partially certified for that and this. They have a new dynamic interactive app where you can search and follow along like subway tile rows. You can print from it. There's a lot of other things. They showed it to us at MCT Day on Saturday. I was pretty impressed. So if you get a moment, check out that URL, download it, and play with it yourself. Okay, I'm going to jump in here. So starting with, for the most part, it's half the sessions on the 331 and 332, maybe a little bit more time on the 331. But I'm going to jump into the Microsoft functional groups that are on the 331. This is clearly listed on the Microsoft Learning website, as well as you see from the URL for the 7331. It's divided into 5 different sections, mostly pretty even. They're almost all 20%. A little bit less on creating, configuring web apps and site collections. But there's also multiple specific objectives listed underneath each one of these. I don't have time to go into all those because there is that many of them today, so that's why I'm just giving you the link to this website, and you can head out there and get a better idea of the larger picture of what you need to study for. And there's also additional links to specific topics like TechNet articles, MSDN articles, and other things that will give you more information. Okay. So first item I want to bring up, and I've got this theme going through my presentation a few times because this is probably the #1 item I've been approached by other people of, wow, I had no idea that was going to be on the exam. So first question I want to ask you is, this is obviously a ribbon bar, and it's used for SharePoint management. How many people in the room know exactly where this is and how to get to it? All right. Well, it's more than the last group, so I'm glad. How many of you, if I actually sat here and selected and said, hey, pick on this one, what submenu is going to come up? What's on that submenu? And are there more submenus underneath it? How many of you would be able to answer that? All right, so we've kind of already lost half. And I'm not bad, because just so you know, I didn't know this the first time I took the exam either. And the last item is, I guess this kind of follows up with the last question I gave you, is if you were given a specific task or a specific scenario and you had to know which of these buttons to click on, and even if that meant because there was a submenu or a sub-submenu under those, would you know which one to click or select? All right, so there's 3 people in here that are smarter than me. Wait, 5. Okay, all right. So a couple quick examples. So for example, permission policy. I personally didn't think, I look at permission policy like that just jogs my head of like, oh yeah, that's what's in permission policy. You've got things like different policies that have full control, full read, deny write, deny all, and any custom permission policies you make will show up in there after you've created them. So one quick question before I move into another one I have here. If I asked you guys which button would you click on to delete the Excel Services application, who would know which one that is? Go ahead and yell out. Service connections. Okay, we got one for that. All right, one for not there. All right, we got 2 winners, and you get, I've got a Starbucks card and a lovely teddy bear. Was you? And over here, I was told I'm not allowed to throw things directly at people anymore. Sorry. Don't think I wouldn't if I could. But anyway, yeah, you're right. This is a trick question. It's not on there. This is the deleting service applications. This is on a completely different page in Central Admin. The only thing behind this delete button is actually deleting an entire web application or deleting the web application and detaching it from an IIS website. So the point I'm kind of trying to make with this is some of these buttons may have a, you kind of see the word and you think, oh, delete, or oh, anonymous, or whatever. Don't jump to conclusions. You need to do some research on these things. So let's go into our first sample question on anonymous access. If you have a brand new web application and you need to enable anonymous access for external users, which button in the ribbon would you select? I'll go back to that real quick and let you think about it for a second. All right, we got one for authentication providers. Anybody else? Everybody would agree with that? Anyone disagree with that? General settings? Okay, we've got 2. All right, so quick. This is just some personal advice on my methodology, because believe me, when these questions come up, I don't have the answer for every single one, but I can start to make selectively intelligent guesses by eliminating questions or answers that I know for sure are not going to be there, and then I have a better chance of picking the right one. So I know right off the bat that the only thing, because we've all went home and looked in Central Admin and studied this ribbon bar very well, right? So now we know when we pop all these up and what's underneath them, there's only 3 here that really have anything to do with anonymous access, and that would be extending web applications, the authentication providers, or the anonymous policy. You go over here, we already see extending web applications isn't here. So now we're down to 2, which is good, because now we've got a 50-50 chance. The difference between the authentication policy and the anonymous policy is where things start to get a little, you have to know your stuff, because it's going to throw you for a loop. So the correct answer is authentication providers. And I think this fellow over here is the winner of a fuzzy little Microsoft pen. All right. And the reason is, let me explain. Anonymous policy to a lot of people, of course, would be what the first thought would come to mind. You see the word anonymous in the question, you see the word anonymous in the answer, and you think, oh, that's probably it. Anonymous policy can only apply a security policy to something that already exists. When you click on anonymous policy, you're going to see options such as none, deny right, deny all. You're not going to see anything like enable anonymous access. If you click on the authentication providers, it's going to bring up a modal dialog box that's going to have all of your different zones listed. In this case, since we're talking about external users, hopefully we have a zone called extranet, and when you click on to that link, it'll bring up another menu, and in the dead center of that, you're going to see the checkbox that says enable anonymous access. So that's a little deep, and I would say, right off the bat, I certainly didn't know that the first time I took that test. So hopefully it gives you a little bit of feedback on how I personally go about troubleshooting and trying to eliminate incorrect answers, and on the kinds of things that you should be studying for in the Central Admin ribbons. All right. Takeaway on this anonymous policy and knowing to create zones for external users, etc. All right, next slide that I have for you guys. I don't have a specific question on this, but this is another topic that I had been brought up by several people of, wow, I didn't expect that to be there. This is probably going to fall under your objective of or I'm sorry, your grouping of planning security and the objective of planning and configuring farm level security. And just so you guys know also too, you're completely welcome to take pictures if you want, but they are going to be putting these slides up on, I'm not sure if it's Channel 9 or the Ignite website when it's done, and if you want them before then just come up to me after the talk and I'll make sure I either copy them onto a hard drive for you or I can share them from a OneDrive link. Okay, but if you want to take pictures, that's fine too, or take notes. All right, so in general, I think most of us know that this is the Service Application Management ribbon in Central Admin. But if, once again, how many of you would know if I asked you to click on every single one of these buttons and you have different options, different service applications or different service application proxies selected, would you know what that submenu is going to be, or would you know if it's going to disable or be grayed out or not? How many people here would know that? You guys are becoming more shy. I don't know if that means I made the test too realistic and hard or I'm putting you off, but.
Service application basis that this service application would have this and this active, and this one wouldn't have those. Is that what you're asking, or does that happen or not?
No, the first one. I'm not saying that you have to go to spending 4 hours of memorizing it into extreme depth. But I would be aware that some of these, when you click on, they're going to gray out. Some of them aren't. Some of them, when you click on, you might click on properties, and guess what? It's going to have 2 options. But you click on a different one, you click on properties, and 7 things are going to show up. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because you could potentially be asked questions that have visual representations similar to this that you are going to need to know where you would, which button you would click on how to get to them. So I will recap for you real quick, just in case anyone doesn't know. Most of these, at least in this ribbon, are self-explanatory, which is great. New, obviously that creates a new service application. The only caveat with that is that's only if the bits are installed already. So a great example of this would be the Power Pivot service application. If whoever installed SQL Server did not install that bit when they were going through the wizard and getting SQL going, you're not going to see that there's an option for new. So that's the only caveat with that. Connections and publishing. Pretty much those two go hand in hand. Connections connect to an already published service application. So example, if it's published in one farm, but you're trying to connect to it in a different one, those are the buttons you're going to be looking at. Delete, in this case, obviously it really does do what it says. It's going to delete service application. If you don't, you should be on a test server. If you don't know what that means, I highly suggest you start looking for a new job now. Manage, there's a little bit of trickery because of the management. Some of these management things, you can get to some of these links from different places. For example, if I highlighted the manage metadata service in Central Admin under Service Apps and I said manage, it's going to bring you to the same screen that you could have gotten to through site collection settings, where you can create the new term store or the new term group or say who's the administrator and things like that. Properties, this is definitely one that I mentioned to you that is going to be different depending on which service app you have selected. Got things like which database is it attached to, which app pool, the name of it, settings in some other stuff. Publishing, as I mentioned, goes back to the connecting. And one last point I want to clarify that could potentially help you would be administrators versus permissions. So administrators are who is allowed to manage this service. So obviously, Jane Doe and John Doe are your SharePoint farm admins. Either they're in a group and that group's in there, or you've explicitly listed in there. However, if you have a separate farm trying to connect to a service, that's not something you're going to be looking at administrators. That's an ID or a service managed account that you're trying to connect to. So administrators are who allowed to do what. Permissions are which ID or which service account, which managed account is allowed to access it. All right, first question here. Another doozy. I'm running them off one by one. All right. Trace and event log monitoring. So you have some complaints. Imagine that. of server performance and too much hard drive space being consumed. You see the ULS logs are taking up a sizable amount of space. What change could you make so that you'll still see error messages, yet reduce the size of the logs and increase server performance? Anybody else think it's different than the last one? The third one? Okay. All right, well, I don't have enough prizes to give to all of you because you were actually right this time. So, yes, it is the last one. Real quick, why? I think hopefully it's obvious why it's not the first one. If you set everything to none, there will be no event logs. There will be no file, and or if there is, there will be absolutely nothing in it, so that's not going to help you. Verbose, although that will give you it's like the most extremely detailed choice you can pick. The problem with that is it's going to highly impact your server performance, and it's also going to create extremely large logs, which would be not in tune with what this question is asking. The last one is a tough call between 3 and 4 because information is just slightly wrong. It's like one step above being too explicit. So warning would still show the airtight message and be the least impactful on server performance and make the smallest log sizes. Information would do that too, but it would create larger log sizes and include more information than just error. So something to be aware of. Once again, I'm going to bring you back to a visual screen. I can honestly say when I took my first SharePoint exam, I did not have this area memorized. And there's also that counterintuitiveness on this screen that, remember, it says the least critical event log. Not I want to list that type, but list the least critical. And since these are all inferior or superior, if you pick verbose, you're also getting information, warning, error, critical, and none. If you just pick critical, you're getting critical and none. If you pick warning, you get warning, error, and critical. So
reset to default. Is it always goes back to warning?
um,
It's always reset it to default. Look at the top.
yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and that there's a button for resetting. I'll be honest with you, I don't have the answer for that one. I'd have to use on a practice machine and see what happens to it. So, from what I'm allowed to disclose to you, what I know of the exams, I'm just saying I wouldn't be as focused on that. I'd be studying to make sure you completely understand what all this means.
So, would there be PowerShell commands in the exam as well, like clear -sp log level?
Yep. So, God, are you psychic? I actually have a little speaker note at the bottom of this. It says you may also want to research how you could set these items using PowerShell as well. So yes, there will be most likely questions on how would you do this with PowerShell. Not only via a graphical interface, but how could this be done via PowerShell? And as we come up to some things later, you're going to there are some things that can only be done in PowerShell and can't be done in the graphical management areas of central admin. That's something else you're going to have to know. I do realize that that's a very large amount of information because there are a ton of PowerShell, SharePoint management commandlets out there. So however you study for that, works for best for you. If you want to take it step by step and like I know how to do this graphically, I know how to do this in PowerShell, or you want to separate it, whatever works for you. I just suggest knowing both. Yes, sir.
It's a perfect example of something that you can do in PowerShell that you can't do here. So would there be a question on the exam on how to use PowerShell to set it to verbose EX? Because you can't do that here.
I don't. Okay, so the gentleman asked if there would be a question on the exam that would be specifically asking something such as, how would you have to use PowerShell to create verbose EX? And if I'm correct, that's like even more detailed than verbose. I can't think of that. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to disclose about specific questions also, but I would say in general, you should know, disclose everything. Yes. Well, and as long as you're all willing to pay me a salary for the rest of my life working somewhere else after I get fired from here, that's fine. But if you're not, I'm afraid that I can't do that for you. So they'll just know that maybe if you do an internet search on what things have to be configured via PowerShell and can't be configured via the central admin or graphical user interface, that might be a good start. I don't know for sure if you would get a specific question on exactly like that. You might get something, though, that could be a mix of, you need to do this, and you've got 4 options. One of the options might say, go into central admin and click, 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 and the other one might say, run the PowerShell command called blah, 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 blah. Well, you'd have to know that, hey, wait a second, I can't do that in central admin. So I already know I've narrowed down my choices to these other answers that are PowerShell related. So I think that's a fair suggestion to make. Okay. And of course, there's a lot more information out on TechNet. Almost everything, MSDN or TechNet, actually has very long. And those are all free, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
For example, what you're talking about, it might say, create a whole new search topology with these parameters and pick out the four command or 4 PowerShells you need to do it. And it gives you like 5 or 6 PowerShells. You got to know which one. That was one of the things that I made.
Okay.
That was in the measure up, and of course that's not Microsoft's actual test. But
Right. It's worth your time to go through it, right? You'd agree. So yeah, so in the right around the corner in the Microsoft Learning area, they have a study hall. I'm going to be in there tomorrow morning, I believe. So I'll go over that at the end if you do have more specific questions or you're having some areas that you're having some challenges with and you need some help. I will be around for the rest of the conference to help. But in general, they are offering free practice labs from Measure Up on the 331 and the 332 next door in the study hall. So if you think you're going to take it here or you just want to do it for more help before you go home and take the test, I think normally those are somewhere between $85 to $125 if you were to go home and take it. So, take advantage of what you can here, that it's at no cost. All right, next question. Planning security. Which PowerShell commandlet should you use to configure SharePoint to trust a SAML token-based identity provider? God, you guys are smarter than I thought. Or I'm using too many recycled slides, one or the other. I've only got a few prizes left, so somebody better stand out and start dancing or something here. I don't know. But volunteer one. Okay. No, you're right. It is. It's new SP Trusted Identity Token Issuer. So the one challenge about this particular question is those are all 4 real legitimate PowerShell commands, and they are all related to security. So you need to know your PowerShell, especially the different types of authentication and claims and tokens and OAuth and apps and all this stuff. I'll go into a little bit of that later, especially on the 332. But don't just glance over at that. Be aware that that's a part of SharePoint 2013. Okay. Next question, more about security. So which of the following ports do not need to be opened to communicate with Active Directory in order to synchronize user profiles with FIM, or Forefront Identity Manager? All right, I need new slides. All right, so that's great that you know that. One thing I want to point out, and maybe it's just me, but I sometimes started to kind of panic a little bit when I'm taking my exams, especially when I see the timer running out and I don't stop and read the questions real clearly. First time I read this, I jumped over the word not and thought it said which of the following ports is needed to open up to communicate with. And then, of course, I started immediately thinking of it has something to do with LDAP, and that's port 389, so I'm going to pick that one. And that wasn't the right path to be going down. So real quickly, I guess if you want more detail on this question on why specifically, it's port 80 by the other 3 ports are listed on why you need them. Hopefully the one thing that does jump out with you on this, though, is when we think of port 80, what is the first thing that comes into our mind? Right. It's not secure. It's not HTTPS. It's not private. There's nothing about it. If you have secret or private or secure information, are you going to send it over port 80? No, probably not. So and seeing as this is what I would consider to be confidential private data, it's about your employees and their user profiles and their phone numbers and emails that salespeople would just love to get a hold of. I wouldn't probably want to make that public. So, takeaway: know how to secure and harden your SharePoint 2013 farm deployment and how to configure several security settings at the farm level. All right, sample question. Let's see here. Planning installation. Microsoft provides a sample config.xml file that you can use to perform a scripted installation of SharePoint 2013. Some people refer to this as an unintended install. This is, just so you know, I don't think this is the same one that comes with the Code's open source project out on Codeplex by Brian LaLancet. I think this is a completely separate file that Microsoft provides, so don't confuse the two. The sample config XML file, before you can use it to install SharePoint, which item do you have to change? Otherwise, it's going to die out. Any guesses? Got one for 4. A couple for 3. 1 for second. 2. All right. Well, great. So whoever guessed the third one, I'll take honor system. Whoever guessed that, I have some free training passes and a couple other things. Just come up after the session, as opposed to me giving somebody, like, removing their eye by whipping it at them across the audience. But yes, that's correct. And the takeaway I want to give you on this is if you've never opened the config.xml file, you probably have no idea how it looks. And one thing that they're trying to clarify in this is, yeah, you need a product key, or it's not going to run unintended and install upon itself. But did you also know that there's tags and brackets around it? So in a way, this is like code for HTML or C#. If you commented something out, when the machine interprets the code, it just runs right past it as though it's not even there. Same thing. It's got comments. The default config.xml already has comments and brackets around it. You need to remove them. Otherwise, when it processes, it's not going to see that it isn't commented out. Okay? So I'd suggest that you search for a sample of the config.xml file and at least glance at it so you kind of have an idea of what it looks like. So takeaway on this one: study the different ways to install SharePoint 2013, including scripted installations. All right, I think we just have a couple more items on the 7331 to go through here. So this one, so this is more of a visual slide I want to go over real quick, and then we're going to go into a question. It's kind of related to it with search, but in general, so we've got the search service application in Central Admin. This is, as you know, search was one of like the massive additions to SharePoint. I mean, it not only is changed in itself as a product and now has several more components that it needs and several more databases and resources it needs to use just to function. It also is what's powering a lot of other things on the back end. One note I wanted to make about the screen, which I believe that gentleman had brought up earlier, someone did at least, was the fact that, you should definitely know all of your sub-menu links and which items go into another menu that may go into another menu, such as content sources. Going into content sources, and then you know that there's several collapsible sections, and you can start to do things like promoted results. What type of promoted results based on dates, pictures, links, whatever, and that's just one item. Researching crawl issues, things backing up, troubleshooting. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But the one thing is that there are some things with search. Maybe it was the lady back there had mentioned this that was in the free exam preps. There are some things in search you cannot do via this interface, and you can only do via PowerShell. So those are things I would want to keep in mind. Okay, so question on managing search. Which search architecture component parses documents. Okay, so we got a couple for 3, a couple for number 1. Anyone else? All right, the young man in the back has intelligently and correctly selected the appropriate answer. It's a content processing component. So basically, real quick on the breakdown of this. The analytics component, as you know, all it's doing is tracking how many people hit a page and some other basic troubleshooting. It has nothing to do with processing content. So we can scratch that one off. Query processing. Queries are there as an answer. You make a call of, I want to know all the documents Susie Slacker worked on in the Human Resources website for the last year, and that query processing component is going to be the one that does the job and sends back the data. So now you're kind of left with the crawl component or the content processing component. The thing with the crawl component is that the crawl component is basically a mechanical robot. Think of it as a major search engine that will remain nameless, that does nothing but beats down any link or path it can find, because its job is just to try to crawl everything possible and track it, put it into an index. Content processing has a higher level of intelligence, actually looking at what it's processing. So in this case, parsing documents, that's an intelligent behavior that's going to fall under the content processing component. Take away from this one, know your 2013 search architecture components and what they do. All right, troubleshooting. Like I said, there's a little bit on the 331 about things that are not specific to SharePoint. They're what I call supporting technologies. And you, I guess I'll bring that up in the next slide. But the differences between the 2010 and the 2013 exams as far as the knowledge level of having to understand not just SharePoint, but the other things you need to know to make, they have to be up and functioning properly so that SharePoint works. And I'll go into that as we start our next section. But for this particular question, we've got, when you browse to SharePoint 2013 and you get the lovely ambiguous 500 internal error, which diagnostic tool might you use to investigate this problem? All right, well, that's good. You all have that right, actually. You have to see how many prizes I have. Otherwise, I'm going to have to start. At least I got a pocket of cash here. I don't know. Nearest casino's out by the airport. All right. Reason being, real quick, the SharePoint developer dashboard does not show 500 errors in it. Fiddler could assist you with 500 errors, but something you guys may or may not know. It's a Microsoft exam. We're testing Microsoft technologies. Fiddlers is a free open source product. They're looking for the best answer, not an answer. So in this case, knowing that, I would scratch Fiddler off because that's probably not what they're looking for in this exam, right? So that does leave us with the IIS failed request tracing is our selection. Takeaway, become familiar with the tools, troubleshoot the entire SharePoint 2013 environment, not just SharePoint 2013 itself. Okay, we're about to wrap up the first part, our 7331 exam, and I want to go over a few things real quick also that I've been approached by people that they didn't feel were clearly explained, that they should have taken some time to research and study for before they took the exam. So we've got things such as Active Directory trusts, one-way, two-way, which one grants, which one receives, what behaviors, permissions can occur from doing that, SQL Server recovery models, and SQL Server reporting services. I've got these noted in a higher or darker font color because these are technologies that are not directly inside of SharePoint. Some other more SharePoint-specific items, setting up a reverse proxy authentication, object cache, I'm not even sure how to describe it, but distributed cache, and you can just search the internet for people's opinions on that. You may or may not get a question on it. I want to say it's not being plugged as much as it once was. Manage metadata navigation, altering search results, how to alter search results, how search crawling works, troubleshooting it, and the app store, This is on-premise App Store, not the Microsoft App Store we're talking about, that how to create an app domain in central admin, how to assign and manage app permissions, and things such as that. So let me see here. All right, I think this is the last slide I have for the 7331. Does anybody have any questions about content on the 331 or about how the exam works that they'd like to ask? Yeah.
Is Office Online, SharePoint Online on the 331 test?
All right, so we have a question. Is Office Online in the 7331 exam? Mostly no. I would say that in Central Admin there's a section for the Office Store and apps, and I believe there could be questions regarding setting up hybrid scenarios between Microsoft Office 365 and on-premise, but since there are now separate exams for Office 365, I believe it's less of a focus. I'd be aware of it. I wouldn't spend maybe days and days studying it. But yeah, at least be a little aware of it, okay? And check out what's in Central Admin regarding those.
So is it based on SharePoint 2013 RTM or is it SharePoint 2013 SP1? Because Yammer was introduced in SP1.
I don't personally remember one single Yammer question. Don't quote me on that in case you get one. I don't remember any objective, any course I've taught in recent times or anything that mentioned you had to have Yammer knowledge. Or say that again about the Office 365? Okay, so that includes Yammer is what you're saying? Or okay, so the Office 365, I guess the 346 and 347, you would have to know Yammer for, but not the SharePoint server, the 346. Okay, so most likely not on the SharePoint server on-premise exams we're talking about here today. I think also the last thing I think I heard about that was, for now, until there's a final decision made, on-premise SharePoint is using the built-in social features, which is actually one other thing I just forgot to mention to you guys. There's a section in Central Admin with all of the built-in social features for on-premise SharePoint server. I'd take a look at those and the menu links under them if you have time. And Yammer's being recommended as the social platform for people who are in the cloud. Okay. So are we good to move on to our next section? All right. So just checking my timers here. I think we should be all right. So Advanced Solutions of Microsoft Server 2013, Exam 7332. Once again, we have 5 functional groups, and each of these functional groups have multiple objectives listed underneath them. I haven't gone into listing all of them here because it would take like 4 or 5 more slides to do so. Follow the link on the slide to go to the Microsoft website, find out more information about the objectives, and those should be links on most of them to articles on TechNet or MSDN or wherever else to help you learn about them. Okay. Once again, mostly pretty evenly spread out as far as the different types of content you'll see on your exam. SharePoint Solutions, Business Intelligence, and integrations a little bit lighter, but most of them are around the same threshold. This is right. I want to go back to real quick here. How many people know about case study questions on the SharePoint certifications? Okay, so like maybe a third of the room. I apologize if I'm repeating myself and you've already heard it or you've already seen them. I just want to make sure I reiterate this because most of the presenters have been. The 332, I can't guarantee what exam you're going to get. You know, all exams have a pool of questions. Each person gets a different test. The person next to you may sit down and take a test, and they're going to get downloaded a certain amount of questions from that pool, and they're going to be given them to test. The person next to you might not get the same ones. But in most cases, I believe that at least one case study is going to probably show up on your 332, if not more. The thing with case studies is with regular exams, as you go through all the questions, you know, it's like they're multiple choice or they're drag and drop or they pick something and you have to put it in order or whatnot. The thing with the case studies is usually a very long, detailed page or two about a specific scenario, and then it comes with maybe 3, 5, 7, or 10 questions just about that case study. With the regular questions, you can mark them from review, wait till the end if you're not sure, kind of think about it, and not panic at the moment. The case studies, you have to think about as being unique in individual separate entities. If that case study has 5 questions with it, you can mark them for review, but before you move on to any other part of the test, you need to finalize everything in the case study, all your answers, and close it. You can't go back to it, then move on to the test. So just understand that case studies are a little bit different than the rest of the regular questions on your exams. All right, so 332 I mentioned earlier. We're going into a lot more about supporting technologies here. The 2010 exams, at least when I took them, we were definitely talking about going deeper into SharePoint. More SharePoint, more specific SharePoint, more about this in SharePoint, more about that. 2013 exams have gone in a different direction. They have gone wide, and that means learning things about SQL Server Management Studio, Windows Server, updates, Forefront Identity Manager, IIS, DNS, some other things that I've mentioned for you here. SQL Server Reporting Services Power View feature, SQL Server Studio maintenance plans, SQL Server alias names. SQL Server alias names are actually, I admit, it took me a while to get this because there's different types of alias names in SQL and SharePoint. I was very fortunate. I had a tutor named Vlad Katrinescu who is working up at the Hands-On Labs. He also has a great website you might want to check out, who helped spend some time explaining this to me. And I'm very appreciative because I think that's something you should know for the exam. Some other topics to cover: claims, SAML tokens, security access markup language, ADFS, Active Directory Federated Services. Here we get into some things that I definitely, the first time I took the test, had no idea that I should have spent some time researching. Exchange e-discovery, trust between Exchange farms and SharePoint farms, and what would need enablement and configuration so that you could do Exchange e-discovery, link server conversations, DNS lookup zones and SSL certificates, Exchange search mailboxes, information rights management, placing holds, exporting data, and all that other fun legal stuff. These are things I can't guarantee would be on your exam, but I've had some feedback that they weren't explicitly listed as like, hey, you should kind of take a look at these before you go and take the exam. So I'm mentioning them to you now. I'd become familiar with them if you have the opportunity to before you take your 332. Okay. So right off the bat, I know this picture's small, so I'm hoping you guys have access to a SQL Server Studio, or we'll set one up in an Azure lab or on a home server, or in the very least go out on the internet and look at some videos. But the one potential caveat taking especially the 332 is if you work in a large company, many times the large company is segregated. Different people have different job responsibilities. That means the SharePoint people, SharePoint admins, are not allowed to be the SQL admins, and the SQL admins vice versa. And there's a separate people who are doing the Windows updates. And sometimes even there's people who are, the DNS is also completely separate. So not everyone in this room might be able to open up all of these different windows and start poking and prodding around to learn these things for your exam. I was fortunate. I worked at a company that I had access to everything. I'm very grateful, even though it was a lot of work, but I'm grateful because I was able to see all these things. If you don't, it's extremely easy to get a $200 free trial on Azure, and you can either A, build your own farm, which I would highly suggest since you are taking the MCSE exams, you should know how to build a SharePoint farm. But if you're going for the lazy route, there is a button where you just click it and it'll automatically create either a regular SharePoint or a SharePoint high availability and disaster recovery farm for you to play with. And like I said, you can get a free $200 trial credit on Azure. So if you don't have a full testing environment to work with where you can get into all these different products, I would highly suggest that you do that. One few things I want to just cover on this real quick. We've got a ton of different things going down the side. We've got the SQL databases. That's more of a SQL feature of your TempDB, your MasterDB. What's the purpose of those? What are they used for? You've got all the databases associated with SharePoint. And then as you go down further, you've got some more obscure things that you wouldn't normally look at unless somebody had specifically requested of you, such as the SQL Server logs, which are completely separate than the ULS and the trace logs from SharePoint. Data collection, policy management, always on, high availability, or HADR, and I'll go into that in a moment. Security, and I believe that there's something here as well on maintenance plans. So spend some time getting to know that menu in SQL Server Management Studio, okay? First question, SQL HADR, or High Availability and Disaster Recovery. Which database recovery feature is replaced by always-on availability groups in SQL Server 2012? So if you know your SQL Server, you're right. It's database mirroring. It's been deprecated. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean it's not, or it's been like intentionally blocked. It just means it's not the supported and recommended method of creating a highly available disaster recovery proof environment or architecture for SharePoint 2013. So takeaway, know which software capabilities have been upgraded, replaced, and deprecated. All right, sample the question design. Now this one, I wasn't quite sure it should be in the IT Pro exams, but I kind of get it because the menu options are all in things that we see as administrators. So if you need to optimize the SharePoint experience for all mobile devices, which items should you use or configure? All right, yep, you're correct, device channels. So most of these you can kind of easily cross off the list as wrong answers. Variations, obviously, that has to do with language translation. Language packs has nothing to do with design. But one thing, at least I personally get confused on, is the difference between design manager and device channels. Design manager, remember, that's more of the visual appearance. How do I want this to look? What colors? What fonts? Page layout, CSS, page templates, HTML. Device channels are, I'm searching programmatically what the user agent of the person accessing my SharePoint site is, and then I've specifically determined that I'm going to give a different layout to them based on that. So it might be that they're coming in with a Windows phone. Well, you're going to get this specific setup or design or layout. The other person over here might have an iPhone or an iPad. You're going to get a different one because it's going to recognize your user agent as that. Same thing for Android. All right. Let's see here. All right, sample question. Planning and configuring search workloads. So I was given this question, and I did my best to research it, but we'll go through this here, and I can give you some information on it of what I was able to determine. But you review your crawl report in the central admin in the search center, and you see that in the crawl rate, which is that huge graph that has all the waves going up and down of how things are being processed or crawling and such, the total content items number 45 million. You currently have 2 crawl databases, 4 index partitions, 2 query processing units, 1 link database, and 4 analytics database. What should you do? Right. Any other suggestions besides nothing? Got one for add a new crawl database. Anything else? Right, once again, the young man in the room wins the big prize aisle. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a Rotten Tomato. I'll see. But no, you're right. Add a new crawl database to manage the increased number of content items. So, okay. So what I think, now once again, I did my best to research this, and I admit I inherited this question. Do you know specifically why?
There is a limit of 20, a supported limit of 20 million called items for the crawl database.
Okay.
When they suggested you should add another one from 40 to 45. So you passed
I had heard that, but I could not find it anywhere on the internet about an hour ago. So thank God that you told me that, because that was the first thing that went into my mind was, okay, well, we've crossed 40 million, so now it should be into our third crawl database. Did anyone else have a point they wanted to bring up?
The question doesn't say you crossed or like came to 40 million though.
So when you go into this part of central admin, the crawl rate, I'm assuming that it's you'll be able to see the number. I can't remember exactly how the screen looks, but we're talking more of like a graph chart, where there's the big waves, like a stock chart here, and you're going to see numbers of how many items it's trying to process. So in this case, I believe that the intention is that you're supposed to know what your SharePoint search architecture is, and that you only have 2 crawl databases. I'm guessing you're correct that it doesn't specifically say, oh, there's a problem, and that's why you're going into central admin to look at this in the first place. But knowing that there's a supported a rate of 20 million items per crawl database, you could guess that this is 45 million is over the supported limit. So, I'm not going to disagree completely, because I do understand some questions could be clearer or more intuitive than they are. Yeah, there is. You are correct. And believe me, somebody standing up here has used that button several times. I know that there's some people in Microsoft Learning right around the corner. I know that some of them work with marketing. I don't believe any of them are the actual exam proctors, the people who create the tests. At least I don't think so. But if they aren't, some of the marketing people over there, you could at least share that question with them. I was told anytime you do submit feedback while you're taking an exam that every single one of those comments is reviewed, especially if it's something where you have specifics of, I don't know if I answered this question right or wrong, because they're not going to tell you that as you're taking the exam, but I could point you to 2 references I can think of why that this is conflicting, and that I think you should consider either removing or rewording this specific question. One that comes to mind that I know that there was a lot of internet controversy over was, what's the least level of permission you need to give a user so that they can manage a list? And there was this huge battle back and forth between they have to be a manager or they only have to be an editor. Because when you go into the settings, I think the word manage is actually used right there at the edit permission level. But then there's this other part somewhere on TechNet that specifically states you have to be a manager to manage a list. So it's when you see things like that and you know that you have some kind of factual proof and you're leaving that in a review, I think that that's going to behoove you more to try to prove or validate your point than just complaining. Although I was told, though, that if there's a large number of feedback that's consistent on the same question from many different people, that those are things that they would look at too. But because I'm not the actual exam proctor, if you have more questions on that, I apologize, I cannot remember her name. Ask for Veronica next door, who's in charge of marketing. She could probably guide you in the right direction to some of the people that actually create the exams up in Seattle. Okay. All right, so sample question for planning and upgrade. I think we're starting to get close to the end, so I'm going to try to fly through this here. Which of the following is not a supported upgrade path? Number 4, okay. Any other ones? 3? Anyone else? Going once, going over here. 4, 4, 4, 3, 3. All right, nope, it's 3. The reason being is, if you read it carefully, we're going from a fully paid, fully featured version of SharePoint 2010, and now we're trying to downgrade it to the completely free version of SharePoint Foundation. You can't do that. So it's something you have to think about, and once again, know which versions are upgradable from other versions. Whether that be upgradable in the sense of I'm going from enterprise, I'm going from standard to enterprise 2013, or I'm going from 2010 standard to 2013 enterprise. I believe that there's a page somewhere out there on TechNet that specifically lists which versions you can upgrade to and from. So I would check that out. Takeaway on this one is know your supported upgrade paths and upgrade options for SharePoint 2013.
Can you explain the first point?
Sure. We mean the first potential answer.
Search server to SharePoint server?
Okay. So, and correct me if I'm wrong. Search Server was a separate free downloadable product in 2010 that is not available for 2013 any longer. Okay. So that's how you would immediately eliminate this. It was an add-on product to 2010 Foundation that made some search stuff happen because it wasn't in Foundation, but they didn't make one for 2013.
That's counterintuitive. Like, that's not a support upgrade path. It's not possible.
But it is a support upgrade path.
That's why it kind of jumps out at me that it's that's not a supported option, or it's not a possible option.
It's listed in the TechNet article as a support upgrade path.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'd have to go look at the site, the TechNet site on this one. I get completely where you're coming from, but from what I understand, some of these have been researched, and there's a 99% chance that this is the answer. So I'd go check the TechNet site to double, triple, quadruple check on that. All right. Okay, so let's see if this is one of my last slides. What number are we on here? Because we've got a little bit of time left. But all right, so you are the administrator of SharePoint at Litware Inc. You're currently using intranet.litwareinc.com and extranet.litwareinc.com as a web application host headers for your SharePoint farm. What would be the best app domain to use for your farm? All right. You're correct. Mostly the back of the room. It's the third one. So takeaway from this one is familiarizing yourself with the DNS and app domains, security concepts, creating app domains, and when you are creating a separate subdomain for apps versus creating an entirely separate domain for apps. All right. I think we're good on time. We got about 10 minutes left, but I've only got a few slides to go through here. Next question. Managing SharePoint solutions and applications. Which of the following processes runs the solution code in the sandbox solutions? Fourth one, like here? Any others? There's somebody in the room that's smarter than me, and I'm going to have to correct that after we go. I'm just teasing. Just teasing, folks. All right, no, actually, it's the first one. I researched this. So how did I eliminate the other incorrect choices? The service host is a generic Windows process. Lots of things use it, and it's just called service host. It could be OneNote. It could be the Windows server. It could be all sorts of different things. It has absolutely nothing to do with sandbox code. Sandboxed code solutions have been deprecated, but you can still run them. They haven't been permanently disabled and taken away. They're just not recommended to be used or to spend a whole lot of time and money to continue to use them. So unfortunately, you still probably should kind of take a gander at the PowerShell commandlets and the processes and things for sandbox solutions. One quick tip I've noticed that I think is consistent on everything that's a sandbox solution is there's always the letters UC inside of whether it's a commandlet or it's a process. It's always two letters that make it different that are not in all of the other processes or PowerShell commands. So I immediately am like, oh wait, that's a sandbox solution related thing. So either depending on whatever your question is, you can either say yay or nay and include or remove it from your choices that you're looking at. The SPC/UC worker process proxy. Remember, proxies are usually things that intermediate connections between other things. Doesn't have anything to do with running it. It's more of the connections for it. The only one I had a little bit of trouble for was the fourth one, which was the SPUC host service. I did do a lot of internet research. I found a lot of people saying they had errors on it, but I couldn't find specifically what it did. So if you have a little bit of time after this is done, feel free to search on the internet and do a little bit of digging and detective work on those. All right, so you take away, know which Windows services do what and how to manage them. So let's see, we've got slightly under 10 minutes. I've only got a few slides left, and then you can ask questions or whatever floats your boat. If you looked at the schedule, there were 4 actual 75-minute breakout sessions that stood out at me that would actually help you on this exam. Needless to say, there's a ton of cloud stuff going on here. It's not related to these exams, but the 4 I did pull out, and I think 2 of them already happened, to be honest with you, but 2 of them have not. So the other ones you might want to, when they post them up on Channel 9 or Ignite or whatever site they're going to post them on, you can look at. We've got upgrading to SharePoint 2013 and its cloud potential with very well-known Todd Clint. Got effective search deployment and operations in SharePoint Server with Brian Pendergrass and Christopher Longer. Properly to scale and deploy enterprise search with Dan Benson and Paul Summers. And the last one is search extensibility in SharePoint 2013 with another couple of very well-known SharePoint community fellows, Corey Roth and Matthew McDermott. The labs, the hands-on labs, which as I mentioned are free and they're kind of like step-by-step labs, help walking you through the process. Those are upstairs across by the main registration desk. I'm going to show you some on the next slide because there were actually quite a few of them that I thought might have some content to help you. But specifically about me before we get to that slide, like I said, I will be here all week until whenever the conference ends, sometime midday Friday. The Microsoft Learning booth or section, if you will, because it's kind of like a few different offices put together, is right around the corner here. I'm going to be at the study hall part of the time, and then the information desk, which is right when you walk in. I'll be there on Thursday and Friday, study hall Wednesday mornings. Any other time, if you want help, I'd say the best thing, if you could just tweet me. I always check Twitter. So just send me a tweet and say, hey, I saw your session. I got some questions. Could you have 5 minutes? You could stop somewhere and help go over this with me. And I'll do my best because I really do. I'm kind of a goofy guy, I'm the first to admit, but I actually do really care if you guys pass your test because I know how hard they are and how frustrating they are, and I know how many times I failed them and how long it took me to become an MCT. So obviously if I can lessen your pain without breaking the rules, I will be more than happy to do that to help you guys to pass, okay? Real quick, the hands-on labs, these are just some of them. There are tons of them upstairs. We've got things on deep dives into hosted apps, search server and BCS, e-discovery, designing BI dashboards and performance point services, getting started with apps, hybrid, deep dive into OAuth, and there's even more. But these were just some that jumped out at me that I thought, okay, if I was going to take the 331, I'd probably, and I have some time, I'd start with these HOLs, and they're free too. Last, my obligatory Microsoft slide. Microsoft Learning, main website for Microsoft that houses everything regarding certifications, exams, changes, where to go to do what, registering, et cetera, et cetera. Microsoft Virtual Academy, hopefully you guys have heard of it by now. There's more free content on there than probably anywhere on the planet. And then, once again, this is a link to that app that I was telling you about that's kind of interactive and helps you with the guide. So, does anybody have any questions, or have I talked your ears off? Or yes, sir. I don't think it would hurt to know both, but in this particular case, it was actually e-discovery for Exchange mailboxes. and how that interacts with search was what the point I was trying to make was. You should know what a site mailbox is, but the point I was trying to make was about holds and discoverability of content in Exchange mailboxes. All right. All right, well, thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it. If I promised you a gift, come up, I'll get you one.